Hi everyone, we are live on Facebook, live on Zoom. Welcome to our Freedom Marathon. I'm Colombe, I'm the co-founder of Atlas, and happy International Democracy Day. It's personally one of my favorite days of the year. I just want to give you a quick intro before turning all of our attention to the incredible panel of speakers we have today. So first, let me tell you about this marathon. We are running a 4 days long marathon on democracy and freedom. And I'm not talking about a run. I couldn't possibly do this. It's a 4 days long conference with discussions, panels, and actions to try to come up with ways to support freedom fighters. At Atlas, we've been talking and working on democracy for years now. We organized hundreds of protests. We managed to bring freedom fighters like the ones we have today to those events to raise awareness. We've been lobbying governments to create a union for democracy capable of protecting freedom fighters, of holding democracies accountable, and of innovating democracy. So I'm really excited for those workshops and for those panels, because together we will come up with concrete ways to do all of this. So we want to hear from leaders like the ones we have today. We will take the ideas and we will take your questions and your ideas as well, that at Atlas we will advance then. And we are getting started with this Freedom Marathon with an incredible panel. On this panel, you can see prominent freedom fighters from all across the world that will explain how their countries became authoritarian, the tactics used to crack down on dissent, and the methods that they are using to fight back. So we will hear from President Guaido, who's the interim president of Venezuela and who's widely recognized as the legitimate leader by the international community. We will hear from Wei Nu, who's an incredible Burmese activist. We already did a town hall together. We'll then hear as well from Vladimir Ashurkov, a Russian political activist and the executive director of the Anti-Corruption Foundation. Ted Hui is also among us. He's a Hong Kong politician in exile and a member of the Legislative Council. And last but not least, we have Veronica Tsepkalolo, who's one of the 3 leaders of the National Democratic Movement of Belarus. It's incredible to have all of you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. To our audience, send us your questions, send us your comments, send us your thoughts. We will ask as many as possible. I also have to mention that we have a great translator present with us. President Guaido understands everything we say in English. The translator, will translate from Spanish to English. So there will be a bit of lag time, so bear with me. I have so many questions. I want to start this panel with a tour of the world. You are all from different continents and different countries. I want you to tell me how democracy is being cracked down upon in your countries. Veronica, you will be up first. Could you summarize for the audience the main ways the Lukashenko government is eroding democracy in Belarus following the rigged elections, and how you are fighting back?
Colombe, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure for me to be here the second time. So I'm from Belarus. I represent Belarus. And for the last 27 years, the same person rules the country. His name is Alexander Lukashenko. And he managed to build a dictatorial system where people are prosecuted only for having alternative opinion, where no political opponent has a chance to survive in the country. If you are in a position, you end up either in the jail or in exile. So-called ruler of Belarus, this is how Belarus people called Lukashenko, lives a life of a royalty, but at the same time, the simple people can hardly survive in my country. So the presidential elections in Belarus took place in summer 2020. All strong candidates for the presidential elections were not registered. 2 of them were put in the prison immediately during the presidential campaign. The third one had to flee the country due to false accusations. This is when I, together with my friend Maria Kolesnikova, who was representing the headquarters of another candidate, we gave our support to only registered opposition candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So the election in Belarus took place in August 2020. For the 6th time over the past 26 years, Belarus president once again falsified the elections, and he declared himself as a president. The level of resistance to election results are unprecedented for the Republic of Belarus. This is a country of 10 million people. Just to give you some numbers, in order to convey the scale of these protests, as of today, 40,000 people, 40,000 Belarusians were being imprisoned, illegally imprisoned in Belarus prisons. we gathered, we collected a lot of evidences of torture, killings, murder, etc. So this is just to say a couple of words of Belarus, but just to give you one more number. As of today in Belarus, there are 679 political prisoners. 75 out of them are female, and this number increases every single day. This is unprecedented for any European country. For any European country.
Thank you, Veronica, for the introduction and for telling us about this. And we'll get back to you on how you're fighting in just a second, but I think what Ted told me before we started the talk is that he emphasizes so much with what is happening in all of your countries because it's similar, and we see similar techniques being used. So Ted, I wanted to ask you, the Hong Kong protests gave hope to people across the world. I know that when I saw what was happening on the front page of newspapers across the world, I felt hope and admiration for all of the protesters. But now China's crackdown seems unstoppable. How do you see the situation in Hong Kong today? How can people in exile like you can help?
You know, what's been happening in Hong Kong and is still happening in Hong Kong is unprecedented as well in Hong Kong. We've never seen anything like that. In the past, even though after 1997, we're handed back to China as part of China, but the deal is that we'll have freedom and democracy. That's why we are willing to be part of China. So in the past decades, even though it's not a democracy, but we were given some degree of freedom and autonomy, and human rights was basically respected. But only 2 years ago, during the 2019 freedom movement in Hong Kong, so the Hong Kong regime introduced anti-extradition bills, under which anyone can be extradited back to China for trials. So it totally crossed the line. So that means we won't have any freedom that we've been enjoying. So over the past 2 years, we've experienced street protests, massive of them. 1 million people joined, and the other occasion 2 million people joined, and then people's spirit was so high, and we were so united. Hong Kongers were all waking up, so we took to the streets. But then what we received was police brutalities with all kinds of weapons, water cannons, rubber bullets, and all kinds of bullets that you would imagine, and police baton. And so, but that part is already been done. That part's finished. Now what we're facing is countless persecutions in court cases. So the regime has been sending people to jails. It's very similar to what's happening in Belarus, and similar numbers, if not more. And so now we've gone to the next stage of having the new legislation, national security law, under which the whole electoral system is gone from half democracy now to a totally authoritarianism. So we don't have any representatives. So, and civil society has been cracked down, journalists been cracked down, sent to jails, teachers, professional lawyers, all facing criminal prosecutions. So what we are doing now is that it's a big question for Hong Kongers. It's very, very risky now to go back to the streets because they not only beat you up, they lock you up for life. So it's very, very hard to get ourselves organized because they monitor social medias, they monitor what you speak publicly. So it's very, very hard to organize on any organizations, NGOs. So we are relying much more as an international city, so-called, on international lobbying and advocacies, and hoping that under economic pressure, perhaps, that China will change its strategies towards Hong Kong, and making sure that China perhaps won't be benefiting from international treaties, from international trades, from all of those kinds of corporations of any kind, that it will change its attitude. More on top, it's hard to imagine and think of anything more than that in order for China, with the world superpower, to change its attitude now. So what's the struggle of Hong Kongers now is more on the table. So we've transformed into more subtle ways of spreading our message out while keeping our spirit high when we can't take it to the streets. But it's still a big question. I'll leave it later for the discussion of how we do it under the table and how we support other freedom fighters, not openly, but secretly in Hong Kong.
Thank you so much, Ted, for sharing this. And considering the fact that you've been mentioning a lot economic pressure, I want to jump to President Guaido, because right now, if I'm not mistaken, in Venezuela, you're having negotiations between the government and the opposition. And something we've seen in Venezuela was strong-ish economic sanctions from the international community and on the Maduro government. So President Guaido, can you tell us a bit what is happening in Venezuela, how the negotiations are impacting democracy, and how you are fighting back? You are muted. You need to unmute on the bottom left.
Gracias. Thank you. Thank you all. Gracias, Colombe, y gracias al movimiento por la invitación. Cuando escucho el testimonio y veo la lucha en cada uno de los países, veo la lucha de los venezolanos, veo la lucha por la democracia. Cuando escucho que Lukashenko tiene años de estadía, bueno, es lo que sucede hoy en Venezuela. Encarcelar, perseguir, asesinar, represión sistemática, es lo que está sucediendo hoy en nuestro país. Creo que es lo que está pasando hoy en Venezuela. Continúa el riesgo, como lo decía Ted desde Hong Kong. Hay un riesgo para el liderazgo y para la vanguardia que se moviliza. Hay consecuencias para los ciudadanos y hay herramientas de lucha. Creo que las herramientas de las dictaduras y los autoritarismos están claras. Y ustedes las han descrito de manera meridiana. Son las mismas que utiliza Maduro en Venezuela, son las mismas que utiliza Ortega en Nicaragua y son las mismas que se replican en estos regímenes o en Rusia. Yo creo que lo importante es que el claro dilema entre democracia y autoritarismo debemos vencerlo. Las herramientas que hemos utilizado en Venezuela, las sanciones, que son herramientas para algunos polémicas, pero son las herramientas que tiene hoy el mundo libre para poder enfrentar este tipo de regímenes. Y hay que mejorarlas, hay que especializarlas incluso, y no permitir que se utilicen fondos que son de las naciones para oprimir a los ciudadanos, para perseguir a nuestra gente. Y esas son las herramientas y por lo cual hoy la dictadura no tenía opción que sentarse en una mesa de negociación, que para nosotros es la oportunidad de una elección libre y justa, una elección presidencial, una que nos deben desde el 2018 a los venezolanos y por lo cual hoy es claro para el mundo que Maduro es un dictador, cual se me reconoce como presidente encargado de Venezuela al haber sido electo en el Parlamento Nacional y ser presidente de nuestro Parlamento en Venezuela. Así que esta es, sí.
So maybe I can jump in with the translation and then we can continue if there's more. So first of all, I want to thank everyone in the audience. I'd like to thank everyone in the audience, Colombe, all of the panelists. When I see the struggle in Belarus, when I think of Lukashenko and when I hear of the situations in the other countries, it's very similar to what we have in Venezuela. It's a struggle for democracy. You have leaders that have been in power for years, that use the tools of repression, that put people in prison. It's exactly the same as what's happening here in Venezuela. There are risks, not just for the leaders, but for the people, for the freedom fighters out on the streets that can fall into prison. It's the same situation in Russia, in Hong Kong, and in all of these countries that we're seeing. The tools that we have are many, but one is sanctions. It's what the free world has to apply pressure on authoritarian regimes. So what we have to do is specialize them, tune them, figure out ways to use them better, and figure out different tools that we can use as well. So because of these tools that we have used, because of these sanctions, the regime has had no option but to sit down with us. They've had no option but to sit down and negotiate an election that the Venezuelan people have been denied since 2018.
Sí, y creo que algo adicional, que es muy importante, creo que no es suficiente esa herramienta. La sanción es fundamental y es lo que le duele a estos regímenes. La organización, la movilización, el ejercicio de la mayoría, el ganar causa común, el buscar espacios seguros de participación, entendiendo los riesgos de enfrentar a estos regímenes, también es una constante en cada uno de nuestros países y por supuesto en Venezuela. Causas reivindicativas, como ustedes saben, en el caso de Venezuela, hoy hay una emergencia humanitaria compleja, 6 millones de refugiados, hay 83% de contracción del PIB en los últimos 6 años en Venezuela, hay una hambruna declarada así por el World Food Programme que hoy está actuando en Venezuela, hoy hay falta de servicios básicos, incluso gasolina en el país con las reservas petroleras más grandes del mundo luego de este desastre. Son parte de las consecuencias de una dictadura. Son 8 años continuos de crecimiento del PIB por parte del régimen. Son indicadores de un país en guerra, el único país en no guerra que tiene similitudes con Siria en el caso de refugiados. En números, ya son más de 6 millones, como les decía. Así que también vale la pena aquí, y como decía Colombe al principio, ¿qué herramientas tenemos para ser responsables a estos dictadores? ¿Es suficiente las sanciones? Hoy creo que es claro que no. Creo que es una herramienta poderosa, necesaria, que debe, como decía, mejorarse, pero también debemos ser acompañados más adelante. Que un dictador force a un avión a aterrizar, que encarcelen a líderes en cada uno de nuestros países, debe tener responsabilidad a estos regímenes y es parte del reto que tenemos. En el caso de América, la Carta Interamericana de los Derechos Humanos es un gran instrumento difícil de aplicar. En el caso del mundo, la responsabilidad de proteger, un gran instrumento difícil de aplicar. Hay que buscar de nuevo mejorar estas herramientas en conjunto con el liderazgo local, con la inspiración que da la lucha por la dignidad y los derechos humanos en cada uno de nuestros países.
It's clear that although sanctions are powerful, they're not enough. Organization is also key. Mobilization of street protests and of the population is key. Being a large majority against the authoritarian regime is key. In Venezuela, we have plenty to fight for. The UN has said that there's widespread hunger in the country. GDP has contracted by 83% since 2013 or so. 6 million refugees have left the country. The country's oil industry has collapsed. So there are plenty of reasons to confront the authoritarian regime in Venezuela. But again, sanctions are powerful. They need to be fine-tuned, but they're not enough. Organization, mobilization, and being a majority are key factors. These are the things that we need to do. These are the tools we need to use to hold leaders to account, authoritarian leaders to account, to make them responsible. What happened when a plane was arbitrarily landed over territory is utterly unacceptable. So we must use these tools to make leaders accountable. In Latin America, we have the Inter-American Human Rights Charter at the Organization of American States. And that's just one other tool that we have tried to use. But so all of these things that I've mentioned are things we need to use and leverage to hold authoritarian leaders to account.
Thank you, President Guaido. Thank you to the translator for the translation. We are receiving a lot of questions, but first I want to finish our world tour, moving to Weiwei. So following the brutal coup in Myanmar, we've seen that there was an opposition government that was created. And this is something that we have seen in a few countries, including in Venezuela. I wanted to ask you, what's the status of democracy today in Myanmar and how are people fighting back?
Thank you, Colombo. It's been incredibly honored to join this panel today. So what is happening in my country is an example of what happens when the international community fail to protect democratic values and principles and hold perpetrators of human rights violations accountable. So as you know, the military staged the coup on February 1st. Since then, our people have come together to resist the junta with the civil disobedience across the country. However, the military, with the same military, which is the same military that committed genocide against the Rohingya and mass atrocities against atrocity crimes against other ethnic minorities, is responding as brutally as ever. In over 7 months, the military junta has murdered over 1,000 people and arbitrarily arrested and detained over 7,000 people and tortured many more. On top of that, the junta is actually weaponizing COVID-19 to suppress the democracy movement, including by manipulating the provisions of vaccines and treatment to civilians. Despite the military's brutality, our people haven't actually stopped a single day to protest against them in many forms. Now, with the slow international responses and the failure to end the military's brutality has actually resulted in a defensive war to be launched against the military, while non-violence resistance is still strong.
Thank you. I mean, the civilians fighting back in Myanmar, I think, have also inspired so many. I've heard from Belarusians, from Hong Kongers that are protesting that they're looking to Myanmar as well as one of those that are giving hope to the rest of the world. Vladimir, we're going to conclude sorry, go for it. I didn't want to interrupt you.
That is completely true. But at the same time, we also have this strong nonviolence resistance movement is still having a strong momentum, and it's continuing. We have to acknowledge both. And support accordingly. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not whatsoever. It's very true, and we'll jump to this in just a second. Vladimir, so we're going to jump to Russia right now, and I've already received a lot of questions on social media asking about the links with Belarus. We'll get to this in just a second. First, we've seen that Russia has been jailing as well prominent activists and opposition leaders and cracking down on dissent and arresting people protesting, just like in all of the countries we've just been speaking about. What's your hope for Russia? If you can tell us quickly what is happening and what you're hoping can be done, it would be incredible.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So Vladimir Putin has been building an authoritarian system based on economic and political corruption over the last 20 years, but it took a turn for the worse over the last year. It started with poisoning of Alexei Navalny, who over years emerged as the undisputed leader of Russian opposition. He was evacuated to Germany, and he returned in January after recuperation to Russia, only to be unlawfully arrested, and he was given a trumped up court, and he was given a 3-year sentence in Russian prison. Another trend that's happening is the crackdown on independent media. Most independent media outlets have been labeled foreign agents, which limits their ability to operate in Russia, attract advertising. It is dangerous for journalists to work for them. Our organization, Anti-Corruption Foundation, which was the foundation of our political and civil activities in Russia, has been labeled as extremist, and most of our activists had to leave Russia or face prison terms. There are elections, parliamentary elections in Russia that are happening this weekend, and it was practically impossible for independent candidates to get registered on the ballots. There's also expected widespread vote rigging. There's also talk of internet suppression in Russia and creating something similar to the Chinese Great Firewall. At the same time, the system that Putin put together is becoming more and more fragile. The ratings of Putin personally and of his party are the lowest that they have been in a decade. the standards of living have been deteriorating over the last 10 years. There is another wave of immigration following this brutal crackdown on civil activity. So what in this situation, what is the strategy of our organization? What is the strategy of other democratic groups in Russia? We realize that we are not strong enough to confront the regime heads-on, because the political field in Russia has been bulldozed by Putin's regime for years, and our opponents have all the financial power, they have all the administrative resources, they have the law enforcement at their disposal. So our goal is to build strong organization and to prepare for inevitable turning point when the system will become fragile, when there will be a political crisis, so that at that time we will be the most organized political force that will demand and will get a place at the round table where the issue of how Russia will be governed at the next stage of its development will be determined.
Thank you, Vladimir. So we already got so many inputs from all of you on tools that are being used, right? We heard about sanctions and now being forced sanctions. We already have a lot of questions on this that I'll get to in a minute. We've heard about peaceful, non-violent protests, about building organizations in order to be able to be there when things inevitably crack down. We've also, I'm trying to organize the hundreds of questions we received. We've also been receiving questions about, you are all from more or less different continents, different struggles, how you can support one another. Because from what I've heard, the circumstances are different, but the playbook that authoritarian leaders are using seem to be very similar across the world. You have repressions, you have arrests, you have jailing, and basically no free speech. So I want to go about it in a bit of a regional approach. Veronica and Vladimir, we've received quite a few questions of how Belarusians and Russians can support one another in their fight for democracy. And we've seen that Lukashenko and Putin seem to be playing well together to crack down. How do you think you can ally and you can support one another to bring freedom and democracy?
Well, actually, maybe I can start answering the question because, historically, traditionally, we are very close with Russian people. We have friends. I personally have friends who live in Russia. I have relatives who live in Russia. I think each and every Belarus person has someone in Russia. And for us, of course, it's a huge tragedy that the president of Russia, he supports our dictator Lukashenko, because I think the population, the people of Belarus already demonstrated that we don't want this person any longer. We want to get rid of Lukashenko as soon as possible, but because this person, he does very nasty things. He did a lot of crimes against the humanity. He committed a lot of crimes against Belarus people. That's why for us, this support from Russia's side, it's very, very upsetting. And every time we talk to our Russian colleagues, counterparts, we ask them just to let the government of Russia know that the ordinary people of Belarus are suffering from repressions. Look how people are kept in the prison. Look how many people we already lost. 14 people were killed. Not a single criminal case was initiated. That's why for me to see that the relationship between the Belarus people and the ordinary Russian people are deteriorating, because, sometimes you look at the decisions of your government and you just apply them to the regular people. And we don't want to choose between Russians, Ukrainians, or Eastern Europe, or Western Europe. It has nothing to do with the geopolitics. It has to do with the falsified presidential elections in our country. It has to do with the choice of Belarus people, because we believe we are able and capable to make our choice by ourselves. That's why, for me, it's quite a painful point to see what's happening in Belarus in regards to the support of, in regards that we're getting support from Russian Federation. And by the way, if you look at the history of Belarus, if you look at the presidential elections back in August 2020, for Lukashenko, Russia was the biggest enemy. And he always plays these political games when he has a good relationship, for example, with the European Union countries, with the United States. He turns his back on the Russians, and vice versa. When his relationship with the European Union, United States, other countries deteriorating, then he turned his back on these countries, and this should be stopped. And once again, I just want to convey the message. It has nothing to do with the geopolitics. We're going to have a good relationship both with Russia, with Ukraine, with the European Union, but we have to make a choice by ourselves first. We need international help. We need the international community to help us to get rid of Lukashenko, the #1 terrorist in our country.
I'll continue Veronica's points and try to expand on it. All democratically minded Russians were watching the events in Belarus a year ago with admiration and hope. It's a shame that Russian president has supported the dictator Lukashenko. It seems like Russia and Belarus are getting closer and closer together, which is not a very good development. The fate of Russia and Belarus are very much interlinked. If change starts in Russia, it will inevitably lead to change of regime in Belarus. On the other hand, if Lukashenko is removed and the process, it will not, we don't know, well, it will be gradual or it will be abrupt. The process of democratization starts in Belarus. It will be such a boost for Russian democratic forces. So we need to work hand in hand with our Belarus colleagues to try to bring forward this day when this change starts. And for Belarus opposition activists, almost all activity now happens outside of Belarus borders. People who are involved in opposition and who are not afraid to speak independently had no choice other to emigrate. Russia is unfortunately gradually moving in that direction. Many politicians, many civil activists have left Russia and are continuing their work from abroad. And there are some links, personal connections between Russian activists abroad and Belarus, but of course we need to strengthen them and to coordinate our activities more actively. And I use this opportunity to reach out to Veronica. Let's connect and let's see what we can do together for each other.
Definitely. And one more thing, just to underline, our sovereignty, our independence is not the subject for trade. We will always stand by our independence and our sovereignty as a country.
I love that already you are reaching out and building bridges between two countries. And that's why I want to turn to Hong Kong and Myanmar. I think across Asia, we've seen the Milk Tea Alliance, and I'll ask both of you to explain what it is to our audience who might not be from Asia and might not be aware of it, that managed to bring together people from across the continent on democratic struggles and to create a link. And I think this was incredible to see. So Ted and Wei Wei, how can Hong Kongers and Burmese people support one another? How can they use those tools of peaceful, non-violent resistance and under the table type of discussions to be able to bring forward democracy?
Yes, thank you for the questions. And so in terms of Hong Kong and Burma, it might be quite different in terms of background from what's happening in Russia and Belarus. But what's one point I think that's the same, and that would be useful, is solidarity measures, solidarity actions. And people would ask whether it will be useful at all, whether it will be effective to have solidarity actions. My answer is yes, and it's useful. For example, when seeing what's happening in Burma, in Belarus, and also in Thailand, I think what we can do so far away in another part of the world is going to the embassies and going to the consulate office in our own countries to protest against that evil regimes that's been cracking down on people. I've organized one before, together with the Multi Alliance, when the protesters in Thailand is being cracked down brutally by the police. I was in the Hong Kong's Thailand's consulate office outside protesting with a lot of strength, and a lot of a big crowd joined. When the crackdown happened in Burma, Hong Kongers in London were protesting. I was the first, almost the first one to raise the idea we should go ahead to protest at the Burmese embassies, but it's actually during lockdown in London that time. But later on it happened. So it's making international attentions and pressures, especially in relatively free countries in the UK. So they have freedom of media. So solidarity also can happen inside institutions. Back 1 year ago, when I was still in Parliament, I was a legislator myself. I seriously thought about bringing in a flag of a Belarusian's protest flag, the red and white one, into our chamber in our Parliament, and also the flag of the Multi Alliance into our Parliament. I think this is something that we can do in countries that still have some degree of freedoms. When in Hong Kong at that time, we were still allowed to do that, bringing in flags, protest flags of other countries. Then make use of Hong Kong being a more internationally concerned city to have that effect of speaking for peoples in the dark age in Belarus, in Russia. So this is what we can do. Solidarity is very important, even though we are remote, but we share the same spirit, and making sure that people, even though they are not reported on international news, they are not forgotten at all.
I guess I just want to add a little bit more on what Ted has described. A big shout out to Multi Alliance in Asia, and it's been incredible. It's actually what we're witnessing today with these alliances and solidarities among the people is that the power of people and the power of connectivity among us, while the leaders, the governments are failing to hold the authoritarian regimes accountable. People coming together as a people is the most powerful tool that we have today, and we're utilizing it. And technology gives us a more opportunity to advance it. So seeing this solidarities and like support among each other has been incredible. And oftentimes our part of Asia is overlooked, while we have authoritarianism in almost all countries, and currently the Thailand is, as Ted who mentions, is another major country of concerns that we have to show solidarity and support. So yeah, this been the Multi Alliance in Asia has been doing incredible work, and we are very grateful for that. And also we've been seeing the more connectivity among the civil society groups. In the case of Myanmar, the human rights groups, civil society groups, women's rights groups are supporting in directly or indirectly with many capacities, and over 180 organizations working for women's human rights and democracy joined my organizations to urge the UN Security Council to hold Myanmar military leader accountable. All of this support has been very empowering for us to keep the spirit and hope alive. And so, I believe we have to stand together. The solidarity of the people is more powerful than ever, and together, I'm sure, they will be able to defeat all of these authoritarian regimes. Thank you.
Oh, if I can add one point very quickly.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, and that also relates to what I've been doing. So especially for the case of Hong Kong. So we have quite many Hong Kongers overseas. they either migrated or either in exiles. But those Hong Kongers, they have a lot of skills, they have a lot of capitals, they have a lot of social connections, international connections. We make use of that and to organize ourselves and as enlarging our stake as stakeholder in our respective countries where we live in. So we believe this is important because only if we are able to persuade the general public in our respective countries so that politicians will change. And so to build a more value-based approach to counter the economic-based approach of quite many countries like kowtowing towards China. So I believe this is important to have a diasporic civil societies strengthened. And this is not only for Hong Kong. For example, now in Chinese embassies in different cities, not only Hong Kongers, but we call for others, ethnics and other nationals to protest against the regimes, the wrongdoers, the human rights abusers in front of their embassies. So we grow all together internationally and strengthen civil society internationally. And that's something I'm doing. That's something I believe is also important.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. Before I have two questions for President Guaido, but before we jump to that, one of the reasons also for which we chose for this first panel to have all of you, so from Hong Kong, Belarus, Russia, Venezuela, and Myanmar joining us, is, we hold weekly protests at Atlas. We've been doing so for over a year. And almost systematically here in London, we have representatives from your 5 countries joining us and basically calling for exactly the same thing that you just said. Solidarity, they bring each other's flag and support one another, laugh at each other's sometimes sad jokes and cry for each other's stories. And it's incredible to see, and I think there's nothing stronger than this. President Guaido, I want to jump to you with 2 questions. One, we spoke previously, and I know that you are looking at other freedom struggles in your region to also learn and share with them how you can support democracy and freedom fighters. So my first question is, how across South America are freedom struggles able to work together? And my second question that I ask at the same time comes actually from one of the person in the chat. Hazal is asking, are sanctions working? And he's using the example of Myanmar, saying that the USA, for instance, sanctioned the Myanmar coup, but it's not even sanctioning the main revenue, that is gas. And I was wondering, because I know during the negotiations you're talking a lot about sanctions, how sanctions are impacting Venezuela and whether they are working, in your opinion. Sorry, it's 2 different questions.
Sí, gracias, Colombe. Yo creo que lo primero es visibilizar. Sí. Lo primero es visibilizar el objetivo de estos regímenes de Maduro, muy amigo, por cierto, también, no solamente de Lukashenko, sino de Ortega y en Nicaragua y todos los dictadores del mundo, es invisibilizar. Cuando hay grandes movimientos de calle, como en Hong Kong lo vimos, como en Myanmar, como en Rusia recientemente, luego de la detención de Navalny en Bielorrusia, es un momento, digamos, trendy de la lucha democrática. Es fácil atraer la atención del mundo para tomar acción. Pero la lucha democrática no es de un día. La resistencia democrática toma años de sacrificio, de hacer causa común, de organizar a las raíces, a las bases de nuestra gente, a las causas reivindicativas, organizarlas y exigir derechos fundamentales. Así que yo creo que lo primero que debemos hacer es no subestimar, por ejemplo, esta iniciativa de poder visibilizar no solamente los métodos de las dictaduras, sino las herramientas que tenemos los luchadores por la democracia y libertad en terreno, en los países, en el exilio, para sumar a la democracia. Los regímenes tienen grandes accesos a recursos, Los regímenes tienen grandes accesos a propaganda, al dominio de la televisión pública en cada uno de nuestros países y hacen ver que están en control y hacen ver al mundo a través de propaganda que tienen controlado y que nuestra ciudadanía está cómoda o conforme de vivir en un régimen como es. Incluso han llegado a cuestionar la utilidad de la democracia. Así que nuestra labor en Bielorrusia, Rusia, en Myanmar, en Hong Kong, en Nicaragua, en Cuba, en Uganda, es no solamente promover la democracia, defenderla, sino poder visibilizar cada una de las luchas en momentos de organización o en momentos de alta intensidad de protesta. Y ahí vinculo la herramienta sanciones. Y hablando de esos recursos que utilizan estos regímenes para hacer propaganda, para financiar represión, para financiar el aparato en el cual se sostienen para que genere miedo y sea riesgoso protestar. Lo decía Ted en Hong Kong, pero no, utilizan el terror como mecanismo de control social. Así que yo creo que si nosotros unimos en esta causa común, unimos y hacemos de la democracia atractiva y una causa como lo es global, tan importante como la defensa del clima, la lucha en contra del cambio climático, porque ¿quién hace, por ejemplo, responsable a un dictador como Maduro, que está destruyendo el Amazonas venezolano con mercurio para extraer oro manchado de sangre y financiar actividades delictivas para tratar, por cierto, de saltar las sanciones, las cuales los obligan a ellos a mover su conducta? ¿Qué significa mover su conducta? No es que es, de nuevo, la herramienta definitiva, pero sí nos obliga y nos empodera como alternativa democrática para seguir adelante. El reconocimiento diplomático es muy importante. El llamar dictador a un dictador pudiera parecer menor, pero el que la prensa o la comunidad internacional llame presidente a Maduro es un sinsentido cuando está señalado por la Corte Penal Internacional, cuando está señalado por delito de lesa humanidad, cuando robó una elección, como pasa con, insisto, el caso de Bielorrusia o Ortega. Hay que llamarlos dictadores. Incluso esos pequeños elementos suman a la causa democrática y ayudan no solamente a Cuba, a Nicaragua, a Venezuela, pero también a todos los luchadores por la democracia alrededor del mundo.
First of all, it's key to raise awareness of the objective, to raise awareness of the struggle, to shine light on the struggle that's going on. You see, in Venezuela, we have the dictator Maduro, who of course is friends with Nicaragua's Ortega and with Lukashenko from Belarus, and he's friends with all of these other dictators. So what these regimes are trying to do is to make the struggle for democracy invisible. They're trying to obscure it. So it's essential, it's important to bring attention to that fight, to shine a light on that struggle, to not allow the dictators to act as if it didn't exist. So, of course, the organization of the base is crucial, the organization of the population, the mobilization of people, the demand for basic rights. So we cannot underestimate any tool. Even this very forum where we are speaking now is shining light on the struggle, is shining light on movements, and it's bringing it to the consciousness. So the regimes, as we've been discussing, they have access to lots of resources. They control information. They create and propagate propaganda. And they do that to make it seem like all is well, to make it seem like the population is okay with authoritarian control. Not just the people inside the democracy, but people inside the country, but the people outside of it as well. So what we need to do is to shine light on the struggle with this forum, with movements, with protests, and with mobilizations. So regarding sanctions, it's just a tool to make authoritarian regimes pay for those abuses, to undermine their propaganda, to undermine their repression, to undermine the terror of what they do. So these are issues that demand global attention. They're as important as for instance, climate change. Maduro, the dictator in Venezuela, is destroying the Amazon. He's allowing illegal gold mining that pours mercury in the rivers that's destroying our Amazon. So, and he's doing that to finance crime and repression. So we need to use all these tools that we've been discussing to shine a light on these struggles. So even the small gestures are important. Calling a dictator is important. President Maduro is not President Maduro. He is a dictator, and he has been highlighted as such in courts, and he's been condemned for human rights abuses and so on. So all of these things need to be added to the democratic struggle and to the promotion of democracy.
Thank you both to President Guaido and to the translator for this. I just want to turn all of your attention to the chat for 1 second, because we've been receiving an enormous amount of comments, both on Zoom, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, about the fact that it's incredible to see you all together. I'm just going to read one. It's impressive to see so many leaders together. They should be done more often. We are all on the same boat. We must fight together. And let me try again. We've been receiving a lot of those comments. I think people are seeing the links between your struggles and trying to learn from it. And I'm going to ask you something difficult. So we received a question from Claudio in the chat. I'm just going to read it out loud for people that are not on Zoom. Thank you for such an inspiring and insightful panel. I have questions for all panelists. Sanctions against autocrats and all direct support to pro-democracy are two ways to contrast authoritarianism. Based on your experience, so given the unprecedented crackdown on your democracy in your country, what is the most effective tool? And we've been talking about a lot of different tools, right? We've been talking about sanctions. We've been talking about calling out dictators for what they are. We've been talking about protests. If you could mention one tool from your different struggles that for you has worked the best. And I know it's very difficult because nothing works in a vacuum. I know that all of it comes together when people come about it from different sides. But I'm asking this because at Atlas, what we're doing during this Freedom Marathon is taking those lessons learned and trying to formulate a plan for the future. So I'm going to start from the first person that spoke last time. I think it was Veronica. If you have one tool that worked best for Belarus, what would you say it is?
Well, actually, we did discuss a lot of initiatives, a lot of tools, which all of us been trying against the dictators who occupy, I cannot find another word, but who occupy our countries. For me, the most effective tool would be to file a suit to International Criminal Court. This is exactly what we did as Belarus Women's Foundation, because when I listen to the stories from, for example, Hong Kong or Myanmar or Venezuela, in some countries, the opposition leaders are allowed even to reside in this country. In our case, in Belarus case, we have this kind of dictatorship where you are not allowed to be inside of the country. You end up either, as I said, like in the beginning, you end up either in the prison or in exile. And this is exactly, we are in exile right now. We are not in Belarus. We are not allowed to live in Belarus because we would be put in the prison immediately. So what we did, I created Belarus Women's Foundation. This is a foundation of not only Belarusian women, but this is a foundation where we have the activists from different other countries. For 6 months, the activists from Belarus Women's Foundation, we were collecting the testimonies, the evidences of the crimes against the humanity, regime crimes against the humanity. For more than 6 months, we were collecting these video stories, video testimonies of women who got suffered from the regime, who went through the illegal imprisonment, who was tortured, some of their relatives were killed, etc. And we did what we did in the spring. In the spring, we filed a claim to International Criminal Court, and we submit all the testimonies. We submit all the testimonies what Lukashenko did against the civilians. He murdered, he deported people, he put the people illegally in the prison, he tortured them, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, we still have not received any feedback from International Criminal Court, which is a huge surprise for us because we submitted the testimonies. And we believe that this is the lever which will help us, first of all, to initiate the criminal case, to open the criminal charges against Lukashenko, and then to put him in a prison because he is now the dictator number one in the entire Europe. The entire world is afraid of him and nothing's happening. And that's why we have a big question. What is the purpose of International Criminal Court? And that's why I would like to ask the government of the countries which signed the Roman Statute, United Kingdom, Greece, Germany, I don't know, Spain, all other countries, because there are huge amount of the countries, a big number of the countries who signed the Roman Statute. What is this institution is for? That's why we ask the international community to help us to initiate the criminal charges, the criminal proceedings against Lukashenko, because we do believe that we submitted enough testimonies to open the criminal charges against this dictator who kills Belarus people every single day, who tortures them every single day while we're talking to you right now. That's why we believe this will be one of the most effective levers to get rid of Lukashenko and his dictatorship.
Thank you, Veronica. And I know that Belarusians also filed a case in Germany against Lukashenko. So it's not only in front of the ICC, but you're also doing it in different countries. So you are saying legal tools can and are extremely powerful. Wait,
yes,
do you want to tell us what?
Yeah, because we believe, yes, we understand, we realize that Belarus did not sign the Roman Statute, but if we look at the history of the proceedings inside of International Criminal Court, they opened the cases, for example, for Sudan, for former Yugoslavia, etc. That's why we ask them, please help us to initiate the case against Lukashenko, and please help the people of Belarus to get rid of this dictator and this criminal number one in our country and in Europe.
It's extremely inspiring that you're doing this, and we'll get back to this. Wait, do you want to tell us in Myanmar what according to you is the one most powerful tool being used?
So in the case of Myanmar, I think, you know, some of our countries are dealing with the decades-long authoritarianisms and militarizations and military dictatorships. And this, in the case of Myanmar, the Myanmar military has been known for its brutalities against the people of Myanmar, as well as the ethnic and religious minorities. And right now, the leaders, the head of the coup leaders, are the one that has been listed by the UN fact-finding missions, and leaders, those are responsible for the genocide against the Rohingya and other crimes against humanity and war crimes against other ethnic minorities. So I support the Veronica's points on the importance of criminal accountability of these criminal leaders. They are criminals. They in the case of Myanmar, I do believe that the only way forward and the most important tool that we have to utilize is the criminal accountability path, and in their impunity, decades-long impunity, and recognizing the crimes as it is in Myanmar. You know, some countries are still using the word like ethnic cleansing, which is not a crimes under international law. And people, some leaders are failing to call it as genocide, and as they are failing to recognize the crimes as it is, and failing to pursue these criminal accountability part and ending the impunity. These regimes, the criminal regimes and criminal coup leaders, continue to commit international crimes such as crimes against humanity and war crimes today as we speak. And I totally believe that the only important tool is to end the impunity by using the legal tool and criminal accountability part, while it has to come as a package as well, because I don't believe only one tool can end everything. We have to prioritize what is important, and we have to take that as a priority. At the same time, we have to add other packages such as sanctions, global arms embargo, and support for the democracy movement.
Thank you very much. So we have, I'm just taking the top one at the moment, although I know it's reductive. We have 2 for legal accountability. I'm just adding, I'm going to move to Vladimir, but adding that Kartiga on the Q&A and on the chat is asking the same thing, making a link with India that is cracking down on journalists and activists, and asking what tools we can use to bring dictators to justice. Vladimir, what according to you is the most effective tool in Russia right now?
Sure, there's no single tool. The key is to be flexible and to use different tools as the situation in our countries is changing. I'll share some of the instruments that we used in our work. First of all, of course, it's strengthening your organization, strengthening your support base, increasing recognition, public recognition of your leaders, of the movement, so that your messages resonate with more people. That's one thing, organizational structure. Second is, in our case, investigations. Corruption is really the backbone of how Russia is governed, and corruption is something that unites people across different social circles, different income, different regions of the country. Everybody is against corruption. So investigations against corruption of officials in state-owned companies is really an important tool to undermine the system. Next is, in our countries, we don't have access to media, which is controlled by the state or controlled by businessmen which are close to the state. So we need to become media outlets ourselves, primarily through internet. And we have done that. And video channel, video distribution has over the last few years became the most important channel for us. Our videos with investigations, with political statements, they regularly clock millions of views on YouTube. Next is political activity. In every country is different. And in Russia, political system is very repressed, and it's very hard for independent candidates to participate in the formal political life. We have come up with a system of tactical voting when we recommend people to vote for candidates which don't belong to the party of power and who, despite our ideological differences, may also weaken the regime. And it's very important to maintain moral authority. In our case, Navalny, his courage in returning back to Russia, facing imprisonment, his statements and messages from behind the bars, and his ability to continue struggle is very encouraging. The same can be said about Belarus activists, several of whom are now in jail, and they are very courageous. Despite torture, despite imprisonment, they continue to encourage people in Belarus and in the whole world. Next thing is, we all know what we don't like about the current system in our countries, but we also need to be able to paint the positive image of what will change for people, you know, on the streets, for people who have been suppressed by our regimes. What will happen if democracy starts to emerge? So combining all these tools is really key, and using the right mixture of them, I think, will lead us to success eventually.
Thank you, Vladimir, for this comprehensive overview. President Guaido, what do you think in Venezuela and in the region is one of the most effective tools right now being used?
Es un intangible, esperanza. Creo que ese intangible que guía, que moviliza y que pone foco. Evidentemente, la unidad de la alternativa democrática en Venezuela y la movilización que ha derivado de la construcción de un movimiento que permita a nuestra gente expresarse, movilizarse, buscar espacios seguros de participación, entendiendo que enfrentamos una dictadura. Pero la herramienta más poderosa que nos ha guiado en estos años de represión, de tortura, de persecución, de censura en Venezuela es la esperanza. Cientos de presos políticos, de incluso los entornos familiares perseguidos de alguna manera y reprimidos. esa esperanza de recuperar la democracia, de tener libertad y, por supuesto, de nosotros avanzar. Insisto, evidentemente, como lo decía Vladimir, acompañado de una organización de base, una lucha reivindicativa en cada uno de los espacios, aglutinar en torno a una idea poderosa, que es la libertad y la democracia, y buscar esos espacios de participación. El acompañamiento de la comunidad internacional ha sido fundamental también en esa dirección, y esa idea de ver a Venezuela renacer y ver no solamente una Venezuela democrática, sino a un continente y a un mundo libre.
Lots of tools are important, but the most important one, I would say, is rather intangible. It's hope. Hope that things can get better. It's hope that guides us, hope that mobilizes us, hope that gives us focus, that sharpens the direction of the fight against authoritarianism. The unity of the opposition is also very, very important. A coherent message, the unity of building a movement together, of creating spaces where protest is less dangerous than it otherwise would be. In the country, there are hundreds of political prisoners. There are politicians whose families are being chased, and so the hope of advancing, the hope of freedom, the hope that things might one day get better is the most important thing. It's intangible, but that's central. Of course, mobilization of the bases is important. Keeping people engaged is important. The participation of the international community is important. But hope, that intangible thing, hope, is the most important.
Thank you. That's extremely inspiring. Last but not least, Ted, do you want to tell us about Hong Kong and for you the tool that is the most important used or should be used?
Yes, it's a big topic, but I would say that sanction itself, and not alone, but a lot more than that behind. I'll explain it a little bit. So it's easy. It's relatively easier to see that sanctions imposed on countries like Burma, countries like Venezuela, and perhaps Belarus, but it's harder and harder to see sanctions over Hong Kong and China. And we have a very simple reason behind that, because it's a lot of economic interest and business opportunities. And so countries need to protect their economic interests. They need to continue to trade with China and invest in Hong Kong as an international finance center. They cannot just cut tie overnight. So what's behind sanctions? Before we have sanctions, how do we persuade parliaments in democracies that human rights and value of freedom weighs a lot more than economic interest and trade? So this can only be done by expanding our stake overseas, as I mentioned. So to influence, to work on advocacy in civil society level, so that nationals and the general public and people in democracies, in free countries, influence their parliamentarians, and that parliamentarians influence their cabinets, and that's how sanctions can be done. Sanctions may not take effect overnight, and especially to places like Hong Kong. So business goes on, but then sanction is important because it puts free countries together, reassure each other that we join hands together in long term, in a long fight against authoritarianism. So it is important that in the long run, these dictators and human rights abusers are put into a boycott, put into isolation, and in the long run, I believe that's our way to victory. So hope is important. Keeping the people's spirit high is important. Solidarity is important. So I would say there are different tools, and so but sanction is a form, and solidarity is the spirit that sustains it.
Thank you all for your suggestions. I mean, there's so much to be said about all of them. I think just so you know, what we will do is our policy team at Atlas is going to draft everything you've said and put it inside of the movement and organize internal debates around it to understand how our next campaign can use all of your suggestions to promote democracy. So it will have very concrete impact. Before we close, I have two questions. One of it will be for all of you. The first one, because we don't have a lot of time, whoever wants to answer it, feel free to go for it. So Andrea and someone else as well, I just want to quote them, and Kartiga both asked about the United Nations. And they want to know what's your take on the role of the UN in standing up for freedom and supporting your struggles. And the reason for this, I think, is because we've seen over the last couple of months and years that the UN has been very weak on certain struggles, a bit stronger on others, but has not necessarily stand up for rights and freedom. And obviously, some of the countries that we're talking about are in the Security Council, which blocks any action concerning certain struggles. But I think a lot of people are wondering, what do you think is the role? Is it working or is it not working? Whoever wants to go for it, please go for it. I won't call on individual people just because of time.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. So it's a great question. Sometimes people are very disappointed about the UN, but I think UN is one of the most powerful and strongest institutions we have to push some of the agenda and to bring about some changes in our respective countries. But we also have to remember that the UN is an institution, but it does act by itself. The actions is coming from the members of the UN, which are basically head of the states that involve in the UN. And mainly the most powerful ones are the members of the UN Security Council, especially the permanent members of this UN Security Council. So a lot of the decisions made by the UNs depend on the political wills of these countries. So I think that is why, for me, there is no reason to disappoint the UN, but to disappoint the leaders of these countries. But we need to utilize this tool, the UN, the institution, to really bring about change in our countries, because they have authorities, they have responsibilities to maintain peace and stability in the world and to protect people. So I think as citizens of the world, for us, we need to push them as much as possible. And when we say we need to push the UN, we need to push the leaders in the UN, the government in the UN, and to uphold their responsibility at the UN, so that we can actually make the UN work. Right now, in the case of Myanmar, we have this debate ongoing on the credentials. Our people, the entire countries, are doing campaign to support the national unity government, which is the legitimate government of the people, over the coup leaders, the juntas, urging UN to recognize this national unity government over the military, over the junta. So it is time for the UN now, the leaders in the UN, to listen to people's voices and to maintain peace and stability. These coup leaders and authoritarian regimes are creating this the crimes, atrocity crimes, and committing the international crimes. So now, it is really black and white. It is about political will of these leaders of the UN member states. And this is time to prove them that they are upholding their responsibilities.
Yes, Vladimir, go for it.
I'll add a few words. I think it's naive to expect that UN will really be a tool for democracy in the world. UN was created to avoid major confrontation and war between, major powers. and to maybe remedy some humanitarian disasters, mostly as a result of natural catastrophes. So, and it has been quite good at that. But the composition of the UN, which includes almost all countries of the world, many of which are autocratic, I don't think it really allows the UN to take sides in terms of democracy or autocracy. In most of the countries that we represent here are really, you know, playgrounds of big powers. Belarus, obviously, Russia is dominating. Venezuela, also Russia, China, they oppose the democratic change there. Hong Kong, of course, it unfortunately more or less in the pocket of Chinese Communist parties. So it's really not, you can't really foresee, and all these countries are present in a major way at the UN. So I don't think UN is the right forum to promote democracy. But G7, the major democratic countries, I think those have to be sort of the target for the message from democracy activists from our country and from across the world.
Just to clarify, I'm not saying that UN is going to side with the democracy movement or promote democracy, but according to the UN Charter, you know, one of their primary values and principles are to maintain peace and stabilities of the world, and as well as to protect human freedom and human dignity. So with that regard, there are tools available. For instance, there are conventions to protect the gross human rights violations, such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And also when it comes to the power and definition of legitimacy, they have to respect the people's voices, and all of these principles that they have outlined it have to be respected. It is our responsibility as people to hold them accountable for their own promises to the world. So that's what I'm saying. And right now, you know, Burma and many of your countries, the authoritarian regimes committed the gross human rights violations. And that has to be held accountable. The UN Security Council is so slow and taking no responsibility and actions. We've been calling for the referral of the Myanmar situations of Myanmar to the ICC, International Criminal Court, for a long time, but there is no political will. So we need to push these governments to have their political will and to uphold their responsibilities.
Ted, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Do you want to conclude
on this question? Yes, I'll just add very quickly. Of course, we cannot rely on UN for justice, because for example, like Hong Kong is what Hong Kong facing is China, which is quite dominant. So whenever there's a motion on the table, it's always China always has its friends, Russia and Belarus and African countries speak for them. But I would say that UN is still a leverage. So we still ask UN to send special rapporteur or envoys to Hong Kong and to your respective countries to have an on-ground observations, I think, and bring back their observations in the international platform. I think at least it's some noise, and it's worth to also fight for that room and that air internationally, so that we are not forgotten, so that the spirit fights on. That's what I use UN as a leverage.
Thank you for this. I think this is exactly in line with the discussion we're having before about tools, and it's why we brought it forward at this stage. I think, well, personally, I agree with Vladimir that considering the makeup and purpose as well of the UN, democracy doesn't appear once in its founding charter. It's not my favorite tool to fight for democracy, but I think it is a great advocacy tool for certain fights, and it has some mechanisms that are valid. I do believe that there is a need of innovation when it comes to protecting democracy and of new institutions that have this purpose in mind, a type of club for democracy or of democracy. To conclude, and because we have 5 speakers that I want to ask these questions to. I want to ask you to speak to the audience. So the audience is not heads of states, head of organizations, or UN official that we have here. It's primarily young activists from across the world, literally from all continents, that have been joining protests, organizing them with us, that are following what's happening in your countries. That I've received lots of private messages in this conversation that are moved by the fact that you came together and took the time to talk with them about what's happening and what they can do. A lot of people feel like this is the fight of Goliath versus David, right? Like it's impossible to move the tide. What would you tell normal people from all across the world that they can do, that they should do? Easy, concrete actions that they can do to support you and others. And I know we talked a lot about tool, but the more concrete you are, the more easy it will be for those people to take it and actually go in the street, go to their governments, go to anywhere and support you. So I will start this time with President Guaido, who didn't speak in the last round, and it can also be your call to action for the end of the conference.
Bueno, gracias además de nuevo por la invitación. Importante iniciativa precisamente para tomar acción por la democracia. Creo que en el corto plazo, activistas, jóvenes activistas alrededor del mundo, hoy hay un espacio nuevo de acción, de interacción, de comunicación, que sin duda son las redes sociales, que han potenciado antes dictaduras pretendían invisibilizar. Creo que esta es una herramienta poderosa, que si bien también es intervenida por algunos regímenes como plataforma de propaganda, uso de trolls o bots, creo que esto con la correcta organización puede generar un espacio, estén donde estén. Hoy Venezuela cuenta con 6 millones de migrantes y refugiados, lamentablemente, pero también son una plataforma activa de acción directa e indirecta de cara a la democracia, de cara a poder buscar avances significativos y defender a los más vulnerables. Así que yo creo que este espacio de ciberactivismo, compaginado, arropado, acompañado de plataformas como esta, porque estamos en Zoom, transmitiendo a través de los diferentes espacios de comunicación, nosotros podemos además generar unos lazos, una interacción clara en cada uno de nuestros países, de cara a Naciones Unidas, de cara a la OEA, de cara a la Comunidad Europea, de cara a los diferentes multilaterales. Yo creo que urge la acción en terreno, ¿no? Creo que no podemos ser descriptores o relatores de tragedias, sino tomar acción precisamente por la democracia y el cambio. Yo creo que hay un perfecto espacio en este momento accesible para la mayoría, no para todos, pero sí para poner y hacer la diferencia. Así que bueno, quería aprovechar esto para buscar, continuar y fomentar estos espacios, llamar a todos esos jóvenes activistas y líderes democráticos del mundo a hacer causa común, a hacer, y hablando de nuevo en estos términos trendy, no solamente la democracia, pero también la libertad, para que cada día se sumen más jóvenes, líderes del mundo y, por supuesto, poder lograr esa meta que es la democracia y la libertad para todos nuestros países. Muchas gracias.
So thank you very much, Colombe, for the invite. Thank you to the panelists that have been here, that have spoken here. Thank you for sharing. I think it's important to take action. So in the short run, this is a space for activists. This is a space for interaction, for communication, this forum, and not just this space in general, but the internet and social media has created all of these new ways and these new tools to advance the cause of democracy. Of course, there are bots that get onto these systems, and there are trolls, and there are all these things that authoritarian regimes try to use to disrupt this new tool, to disrupt social media and the internet and so on. But we are here, and we overcome those obstacles. So cyber activism, what we're doing here now, is crucial. It's important, and we're using it to draw ties between our countries: Venezuela, Hong Kong, Myanmar, Belarus, Russia, and we can't just use these tools to be storytellers. We can't just narrate the events of our countries with these tools. We must use them to take and organize action. So we need to use these tools, social media, to call on the leaders of the United Nations, to call on the leaders of multilateral organizations, to call on the public. So every day we need to see more of this. We need to engage with these tools further, just to continue advancing the cause. So once again, to everyone on the panel, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for this. And Veronica, do you want to tell us what activists can do to support you and to support fellow Belarusians?
Yes, I would like to thank you, Colombe, for such a great event as well, because it's been a pleasure to talk to all the activists from the countries. This is number one. Number two, as I said in the very beginning, we ask for international help. Number one, to make Lukashenko a complete isolated person, because we know how it was in the previous years. As we know, Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years, and every time he falsified the elections, 2, 3, 4, 6 months later, the rest of the world forgets what happened in Belarus, and they start to invite him, for official visits, etc. So this should not happen any longer. This is number one. Please be vocal about Belarus. Please share our story. We are ready as activists to share our stories, to share the stories of the political prisoners who are illegally detained in the prisons. This is number two. And number three, as I said, please help us to initiate the criminal proceedings against Lukashenko, because we did send the letters to all members of the Security Council of the United Nations, to all 10 members of the Security Council, the permanent members, to the members which are elected each year. But so far we have not heard back, and this really surprises us in a negative way, because we submitted the testimonies, the evidence. What else do you need to initiate the criminal proceedings? How many more Belarus people have to die for you to open the cases? We ask for international help, for international support. Please help us to send Lukashenko to The Hague. Please help us to get rid of this dictator, because as I said, as of we speak right now, Belarus people are suffering, and we need to stop it with the international help, with the people of Belarus who are inside of the country, and with the help of the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've heard already quite a few suggestions. Wei, do you want to tell us what the people here can do?
Sure. So leaders have already told us that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Likewise, attack on the freedom somewhere is a threat against the threat everywhere. Based on my experience working on the human rights and democracy in Myanmar, we often tend to close our eyes when people and our neighbors are being, freedoms are infringed and liberties are attacked. Sorry, just give me one.
No worries. Okay.
Sorry, I have a noise. So what I want to say is that it is incredible to see the support and solidarity that people of Myanmar we are receiving for our fight. But I want you to learn more. Everybody, each and every one of us, including myself, it is important that we always learn deeply about the causes and suffering, and take actions with the empathies and with the deeper understanding and respect to the causes. President Guaido mentions earlier on the narrative of the people. And it is crucial to understand the narrative of the affected communities and countries, and paying attention to what people on the ground want and calling for, and supporting their calls with empathy is essential. So stand with us, bear with us, and support our calls.
Thank you so much. So we've heard already about advocacy, about learning, about supporting. Vladimir, what do you want to tell the audience?
I will resonate, I think, what most people have been answering on this question. Most of the activists of your movement, they live in developed countries, they live in democratic countries. I don't think that people, politicians, and the wide audience, wide public in these countries are aware what risks absence of democracies in our countries create for them. Every totalitarian regime affects people in developed countries. I mean, Russia is probably the best example, which over the last few years, it has brutally redrawn borders in Europe, something that hasn't been done since World War II. It has orchestrated assassinations in several European countries. It has meddled in numerous elections. And to say that it's not important or it's not the place of Western countries and Western governments to devise a coherent strategy of confronting totalitarianism in Russia and other countries is really absurd. And I call on everybody to try to make people aware and to call the attention to this issue.
Thank you, Vladimir. And Ted, the closing words are for you.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for your sharing. And I have strong feelings towards what you have just said, especially from the anger from Veronica. And I assure that I feel the same anger in my heart. And I think this is important to express our anger, our emotions in different platforms so that we have solidarities. So for ordinary young protesters, people, I think what they can do is that don't feel small or subtle, don't let the world change what you are and what you believe. So there are pragmatic things that you can do and Hong Kongers are doing. So they attend criminal courts to support those who were charged by the regimes. They send a lot of letters, tons of letters to those in jails, letting them know that they are supported, there are people behind them, and they send pragmatic, physical, financial support for the families. And sometimes I think when social media will be gone, education will become brainwashed. What they can do is that they meet physically, they keep the organization running, they spread the message and support independent journalists and independent media, even though their number are tiny, even though they might not be as influential, but do that, do donations. I think these are very small steps that they can do, but collectively very powerful.
Thank you very much. Or I won't attempt to summarize the hour and a half of discussion in just a few closing words, because this is also the opening panel of our Freedom Marathon. So I'm thrilled that you all accepted to join. I'm very thankful to the audience as well for all of your interventions and comments. And I just want to point out that in 25 minutes, we'll be having a workshop with other freedom fighters from Cameroon, Syria, Azerbaijan, and Venezuela again. And we will be discussing a similar topic, but working together in a workshop mode on how to protect freedom fighters and on how to come together. So I encourage everyone to connect. You've received the link via email. Thank you to all of the panelists today. We will use your suggestions. We will use all of your ideas in order to better come together, to better support one another. And we'll definitely be in touch to build this global front for democracy. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.